Well, we are at that time. It's a small crowd, but we are here. Thank you for being here. I am going to get things started. So we will start by acknowledging that we are broadcasting from the land of the Okanagan peoples, and we're grateful for the ability to share the land with them. This is the fourth. One, two, three, four. Yes, it's our fourth presentation in our series. I'm delighted that Rachael has agreed to do this with us. I've known Rachael for a long time and have bumped into her over the years as fellow parents and fellow citizens in our community. And I've always admired the work that she does. And she's exactly the perfect person to share with us this really important topic. So over to you, Rachael. Thank you.
Why, thank you. So the other thing I was going to say, if you do have questions, down at the bottom of your screen, if you move your mouse around, because sometimes it's hidden and I am terrible with this, you'll also see the raise hand. So that's an opportunity too, if you want to speak or to ask a question. So thank you for inviting me today. This is an interesting format for me. I feed off of people, so it's always challenging when I don't actually get to see faces. So at least, Chris, I get to see your face, and that's a good thing. To introduce myself, my name is Rachael Zubick. I coordinate the Community Safety Office in Vernon, and I've been here just shy of 21 years. I have indeed lived my life here. I am a parent. I have been a step parent. I've been a single parent. We've done the his, hers, and ours parenting. So I've had some of an adventure when it comes to raising children. I have to say that the advent of the internet has made things a little different because my son, as I'm sure somebody within this group will tell you, feels that his life was stunted because we didn't actually have internet until about 12 years ago. And because he's into programming and he's into all of these techie things, it's been a challenge for him. But as a parent, I'm kind of glad because I had enough to worry about with the his, hers, and our tapestry of what they call a blended world, which I don't believe in the blended concept, but that's another story for another day, and that's a seminar into itself. But what I want to talk to you today about is mostly about the changing world that we're raising children in, and the digital world that we have to function in. We don't have a choice anymore. But what I want everybody to understand is safety is safety. Nothing in that realm has changed. What has changed is how we apply it and deliver the message. So for instance, what were the first things, if anybody wants to type it in thing, what are the first safety messages you can remember your parents instilling in you as you gained independence? And I'm talking going back to the early ages of single digits. Anyone? Exactly. Don't talk to strangers. Anyone else? Look both ways. Absolutely. We got another one. So think of tell your parents where you're going. You don't just run out the door and head off going wherever you want to. If somebody in the street makes you feel uncomfortable, or if somebody speaks to you, yeah, don't touch the stove. Yes. And those basic things. Don't talk to strangers. Ask permission before you leave the house. Tell your parents where you're going. And if something creeps you out, if somebody makes you feel uncomfortable, talk to your parents. Nothing has changed. It's exactly the same on the internet. And with that, I'm going to go to my first attempt at sharing screen, if that works, sir.
Give it a go.
Let's give it a whirl. If it'll do it for me. Are we up? Did I get it?
Nope.
See, this is where it worked before. Oh, there we go. I apologize. I'm technologically challenged. Go figure.
Okay, we've got the window again.
Good. We're gonna get there from here. My apologies.
Schmidt, Peters, Jansen, Hermans. Is your son home?
Yes, he's up in his room. Come in. Hi, it's classy here. Yeah, upstairs. Well, then we'll go up and try out some kinky stuff. Yeah, okay.
Good location.
There.
Good afternoon.
Oh, hello.
Is this little Anna? You've got a nice bunny. Come on, I'll show you a real bunny.
In life, you would protect your children. So why not protect them on the internet? ClickSafe.de.
It's a pretty intense video, but it really does have a lot of really, really good messages in it saying just, this is the reality. I'm not sure, am I back?
You're back.
Okay, thank you, sorry. As I said, technology in this world is not my favorite thing. Things that we have to understand is when we actually let our kids into the internet or live in the digital world, we open up without borders. There is no parameters there. And the thing that's scary is that we're not ready for that as parents. So when I ask children, when I go into the classrooms, I hold up my cell phone and I hold up my laptop or my iPad and I ask them, what's the difference? I'm going to ask the same question to all of you. What's the difference between my cell phone, my iPad, or my laptop? Anyone?
Come on, guys.
Yep. And that's exactly it. Exactly.
Yeah,
the
screen
size of the
size.
screen. And what's really interesting is parents, when we hand our kindergarten child a phone, which I can tell you is fairly common, the average age of a child getting a phone now, you're talking about kindergarten, grade 1, 2. 50% of children in grade or that are 7-year-olds have phones now. So whether the horror. I don't think people realize that what you're handing is unfettered access to the entire world without parameters. And that's terrifying. So some people would say to you, well, what can I do about that? That's the way it goes. The reality is, as parents, whether you're guardians, whether you're the important person in that individual's world, we have to set some type of parameters. It's all about communication and relationships. So, I mean, this is not new to us. We know that in order to survive or to communicate or to be healthy individuals, communications and lines of communication have to maintain themselves. Basically, when it comes to cell phones, it's a tool that we actually have at this point in time become a necessity. I used to say that they are a privilege, and in a lot of cases they still are. The thing we don't have these days, a lot of people no longer have landlines, and there is no longer the phone box. You know, they're far and few between. And I know in Vernon, we got rid of the phone boxes specifically because there were a lot of activity going on there, none of which was calling Ma Bell. So it's a challenge. But the really important thing that we have to do when it comes to giving those types of or developing those lines of communication is setting expectations together with the individuals you're working with. And I'm going to go with youth and children. If we're talking 7-year-olds, think of a 7-year-old having a phone in their hand, and all of a sudden the entire world opens up to them without any type of guidelines on how to use it. We don't get into a car, push a kid in and say, go. You know, there's all these things that we slowly introduce into those worlds so that the children can develop some type of skill set in order to function within them. So what I would recommend when it comes to especially the first cell phones, start developing a line of communication that has, you set the expectations together, sit with them, create a contact list, and work only with that contact list initially. It's like everything else. The kids laugh at me when I tell them this in the classroom. If you can develop trust with your parents now, you are going to be golden when you want to borrow the car later. But it all has to do with developing that relationship with trust, and trust goes both ways. So basically that first list has to do with just the context you both approve of. So you've got your grandma, your grandpa. If there wants to be an addition to that, you have to have that conversation and say, who is it that you want to add and why, right? You have to also create an understanding of you're going to monitor that list. And that's something that in this day and age, everybody goes, what about privacy? So what about privacy? What do you think about privacy and a 7-year-old on the phone? Or even a 12-year-old? Any thoughts?
I mean, heck no. I mean, I've had 7-year-olds and 12-year-olds, and there's not really a privacy need. I mean, you want to have them develop appropriate boundaries.
Mhm.
But yeah, indeed. Thanks, Gwyneth. Safety over privacy. Precisely.
There's so many parents that say, I don't want to step on my children. I don't want to interfere with them. I don't want to violate their privacy. And I have had my older adult children say to me, well, it's basically kids are using this now as their online diary. That's a bad plan, number one. There is nothing, technologically speaking, that is private, period. You put it on a device, it's hackable. So that means if people are indeed using this as their online device, as a means and ways of journaling their life, they've got a lot of problems coming down the pipe, because there is a possibility that could end up in the hands of people they don't want it in the hands of. So we have to develop that relationship with our children where they understand that you will gain more and more privacy the more and more we establish that relationship and understanding of boundaries, that I can trust you with that. The thing that we also have to do is that we create that understanding, monitoring text, browsing, and those privileges can be removed if they're abused. But the flip side to that is that they can be added to as well as we gain more and more capacity to understand the big world that we're looking at. Like, we don't just shove our kids out onto the street and say, go for it, see how it goes, don't worry about it, when they want to go to their friend's house or whatnot. Some people talk about creating a contract. I always have a hard time using those legalese words, because we have to remember that we're dealing with an emotional brain. We're not talking about black and white here, because there's so many shades of gray in the middle of it. But if that works in your family and that's something that works with you, then look at that and do it together, not the thou shalt do this or thou shalt not be able to do that, because it doesn't work. It never worked for me. I doubt it's going to work for many others. And if any of you have ever met my children, it doesn't work for them either. However, the biggest part of this is you must follow through on consequences if those things, that expectations have been breached. And this again goes back to very basic communication and personal safety, right? We already know that if we went next door and we didn't tell our parents, your parents would come unglued because they didn't know where you were. Imagine this on the information highway, because the information highway is even more vast than anything that we could consider in our world at all. Because Lord, I never expected this to happen, though I did have a nerdy brother that was a computer systems designer, and he still is. But the other thing we have to understand, that people believe that they can hide behind those screens, even if they're tiny and 1 inch by 1 inch. So they suddenly become very brave. So safety rules vanish, behavioral expectations will vanish, and privacy vanishes. They don't understand the concept of privacy. And when I'm talking about privacy, I'm not talking about them not sharing that information with the parents or the adults in their life. I'm talking about taking images of people that we would not in normal environment accept. So we're talking about shots of people's nether regions and whatnot. I want to use a colloquialism, but I'm thinking, I got into trouble for that last time, so I won't use a colloquialism. But the reality is, children in grade 6 and 7 are having penises sent to them by email by their colleagues in a classroom. These are young ladies, women, or whomever having been sent these images. And so many parents don't realize that's happening. It is a huge problem. And now we're introducing a whole other layer of concern and behaviors that our children are walking into. So when we talked about when we were kids, you show me yours, I'll show you mine, as child play when you're very little, there's a difference between that activity when you're 3 and 5 year olds, and then you have a child taking a picture and sending it the same way. The biggest difference is once it becomes digital, there's legal ramifications. So we have to be careful with that. So we start talking about, well, what can you do? What is it that we can do as parents in terms of smartphones? And there's so many things that we have at our fingertips, because cell phones are portals to a world. I like that. There's an author, and she's online, from the Kitchen Counter Chronicles, it's called. And she said it's a portal to a world without boundaries. And I like that concept because it really is. And walking out of our front door can be a portal as well sometimes. And we teach our children to navigate that from the minute that they're out into the world. We have to look at smartphones and say, okay, so what is it that we as parents can do? We have to understand we own the contract. So up until a youth is 18 years old, they can't have their own phone in the sense of owning a good contract. Yes, you can get the pay by, whatever, pay by the minutes. They don't get the data that they want, and it's not as convenient, and it can be increasingly expensive. But parents have to realize that you own the contract, and with you owning the contract, that goes with some legal understandings of people who use things in your name. We also can block data. Data can be blocked on certain devices, and you can get apps that will filter. So there's a whole series of applications that could be used. Everything from Norton has one, Kaspersky has one. There's a whole series that work both with cellular devices as much as they work with laptops or whatnot. And then there's some called Boomerang that is strictly for your phone devices as opposed to a computer. So whatever works in your world, take a look at what they look like and walk through with your children, right? Some of these also you can apply permissions for actually downloading apps. Yeah, absolutely. That Gwen says.
Can I jump in there, Rachel,
Please.
and say, you mentioned earlier that a starting agreement with your child on a cell phone could involve a very limited contact list. Are there tools that allow you to restrict the use of the phone to communication to that contact list?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
And that's those apps, right?
Ah.
It's not so much as they can restrict them. And again, I'm not well versed in each of the different details
platforms,
of platforms. Yeah. But what it does is it gives you feedback as to all the calls and all the information that's going back and forth and what the children are using at the time. So it gives you all kinds of information as to how the phone is being used and with whom and at what time. So they're pretty handy that way. And yes, they can restrict. Does anybody have any questions at this point? I seem to be just rambling, though I'm very good at rambling.
Yes.
Yes, Gwyneth.
Yes. Go ahead, Gwyneth.
I'm just wondering, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I'm just wondering how, especially when you're dealing with, I mean, now we're talking about 7-year-olds and younger children getting phones, but I didn't get a phone until I was a teenager. And, at that age, you're a little bit more irritable, more difficult to deal with. So I'm just wondering, what is the best way to approach that kind of building of trust and establishing the contract with teenagers who tend to be a little bit more, they want to rebel. The idea of having a contract and having their parents control over their phone, that could put some on edge and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm just wondering how to approach, especially with that age.
It's a good question. I mean, it's a challenge no matter what. Getting up in the morning and having that conversation, getting people out the door to school is a challenge with teenagers at sometimes. It's hard to answer. It's just being open and communicative, because if nothing is black and white, and every situation has a consequence or a reaction. And if you wanted to use a car and you were in a miserable mood, would I probably lend you a car? Probably not. I think just being able to have dialogue sometimes, and it doesn't always work. And then when you take the phone away or you cut back the data, it causes chaos. It's about conversation. And with some children, and Ms. Wakefield had said this conversation earlier, we do know that people become addicted to their phones. And so much it's the addiction, not even to the phones, but just in terms of the internet and technology, because it's that feedback that you get and the gratification you get depending on what you're doing on the phone. And that could be just simply arguing with somebody. And you enjoy the battle and the adrenaline rush you get with that conversation. But to go back to the parenting thing, it's a really hard row to hoe raising children no matter what. It's a much more difficult time when they're going through some serious challenges. The only opportunities you have is to be consistent with what you're saying. This is, if you do this, this will happen as a consequence of this action. Does that mean it's forever? No. Does that, I mean, it sounds kind of airy-fairy and a little bit idealistic, I know, but it does work at times. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get blowback when it comes out to I want your phone now because I heard that this text went over and I need to know because I own this contract. And from a policing perspective, when they take your phone as evidence, I'm going to have to answer some questions. And trust me, that happens.
Jane, go ahead. You have to unmute.
I'm there, I've unmuted.
You good?
One of the things that I spent a lot of time doing as a parent was a what would happen if scenario thing with the kids, so that they were internalizing some of the thinking that we had as parents to keep them safe. And I think that it's quite possible that you might do the same with some of the internet stuff, especially when you get through to the teen stuff, because you need to know what would you do if, and can you provide me with a safety plan? Because that's the one you really want to know is, do they have a safety plan for what happens, if something goes on the internet with them? Because there's many things. I mean, we also have to worry about all that internet pedocriminality stuff as well. So there's all sorts of things that we have to worry about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay,
So-
that's all I had to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane.
No, that's awesome, because that is something we talk about. And sometimes that can be the challenging conversation. And what we do know for sure is that parents that do not have those discussions, the children or the youth will go find those answers themselves, whether they're right or whether they're wrong. And unfortunately, the scenarios that you talk about in an environment where the youth is just plowing along and not asking questions or doesn't have that way out, they will and they can get the answers from individuals that may also groom them into other things. And that is one of the, in terms of, you've heard about sextortion, you've heard about online predators, that is how they get in. It's having those conversations and being that way out. But hopefully, as we have parents that are now more versed in the internet, I mean, my generation's that in between, we didn't have a computer in our house. We didn't, like when I was growing up, the microwave was a challenge. So just, we didn't get anything like that till way later. And I mean, honest to goodness, when we moved to our place in Vernon here, we didn't have a line, we don't have a landline. But we actually didn't have phone lines. So we were required to have the cell phone, and that was it. It was a tool. It wasn't a device. And the difference was quite huge. But that didn't mean that the kids weren't getting exposed at school. That's a great, discussion. But so let's talk about that a little. I'm going to throw out another one of these fabulous moments. This is a little bit longer. So it was LG came out with an incredible bunch of PSAs and conversations about internet use. And Jane Lynch is in this one. And I think she says it is a really good segue into the discussion about those things that can cause some concerns. So hopefully, if I'm still sharing, aren't I? Nope.
Not yet.
Oh, I'm so challenged. I do apologize. That's not the right one. Let's go back. Am I there yet? Am I there?
You're not there yet. You need to share screen and pick a
Would
window.
you like me to share that? And yeah, pick one. Got
Just
it.
pick a window.
Share.
Any
Duh.
window.
This
There
one.
we go.
How about this
Beautiful.
one?
Looking
I'm
good.
so sorry. Yeah, you wanted me to say do something with it now?
Hi,
Yay.
I'm Jane Lynch. Today you see before you a model citizen, but not long ago I was a model jerk. I had become a texting fiend. I ran the gamut. Mobile bullying, text rage, you name it, I typed it up and hit send. Dandelion salad, dandelions are weeds, lady. Until one day I got pulled over for texting while driving. Yes, I'm such a texting. And they also tried to make the getaway on foot. And now, after a lengthy rehab with the good folks at LG, I'm fulfilling my community service by showing other parents how to guide their precious youngsters through the perils and pitfalls of mobile phone misuse. I'm Jane Lynch, and I'm here to teach text ed. Welcome to Text Ed. Well, we're going to start out with a good one today. Sexting. Yes, windbreaker.
What exactly is sexting?
Why don't you go to page 1 there and read it for us?
So sexting is the distribution of pictures or texts of a sexual nature via your mobile device.
Well, there you go. It's simple, right? It sounds like flirting over the phone. Well, it's more than that. It's worse. Because when your teenage daughter has got teenage love fever and her boyfriend threatens to dump her if she doesn't give up some pics of her what's, all she got to do is grab her camera phone and say cheese. Now, flash forward a few weeks, things have gone sour, they've split up, and BF still has a memory card full of saucy high-res photos and heavy breathing love notes. Kids these days, they're sending around sensitive stuff without thinking about the consequences. Your honor student might sext herself right out of that scholarship. And the BF with the pictures on his phone, he might be breaking the law. And in some states, he could be facing serious jail time. How many of you have had an STD? Not that kind of STD, Tina. I'm talking about a sexual texting disaster.
Sexting is such a dirty word. Can I say making sweet, sweet text?
Well, look, I know this is tough, people. I'm a parent too. But no matter how uncomfortable we are with this, it's too important to sweep under the rug.
But it says that 68% of kids would rather have their phone conversations monitored rather than their texts. Why is that?
Because they can hide some juicy secrets in those texts.
Not my baby girl.
My daughter actually admitted it.
This is making me very uncomfortable.
Yeah? Well, then it's time for a homework assignment.
So she says it well. And I can tell you now within the school system, oops, did it stop?
Look,
It didn't stop.
Talking to your kids about sex.
I am so challenged. There we go. I'm back. I do apologize. Sexting has become a massive problem. And Hillary, when you're or Jane, when you're talking about having those opportunities for your youth to have the lifelines, this is something that we need to talk about really early in the game. A lot of youth don't realize what they're doing is sexting, and it comes under the child pornography laws. So this is actually any type, and in Canada, the law says that it talks about video, pictures, written material, audio of any type that is sexually explicit and has sexually explicit material that is delivered to a person under the age of 18 is a criminal conviction. So when they talk about taking pictures of their breasts, or they talk about taking pictures of penises and sending it to each other, they are technically under the law, breaking the law under the child pornography side of things. We have kids that have phones that they think it's really funny to grab the phone, take a shot into the bathroom, underneath a stall or over a stall or in the change rooms, and then they send it out. Or then we get into the other things, which again, back into the whole delivery of sexual health, or just as children start to mature, start asking questions, doing foolish things, as happens. The difference now is we have the internet involved. So when they decide that, and Jane made the perfect example of, so-and-so are madly in love, they love each other, they're gonna love each other forever and ever, and they decide to take nude shots of each other and just share them with each other, and then they break up. Or somebody hijacks the phone, they leave it on the counter, they don't have it password protected. What happens is they hit send and it goes out to everybody. We have dealt with this multiple times within the system. And I'm talking 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds with these pictures either being sent to them. And the thing that they're also doing is they're not actually viewing the material all the time. They're just hitting send and forwarding it onwards. These are the challenges that we're seeing more and more. And this is where the people that are important in those youth lives have to have those conversations saying, this is a problem. If you're uncomfortable with it, hopefully you can come to me. If you can't come to me, these are the places that you can go to get those help or to have those conversations. And I try to instill in our youth that forwarding it doesn't make it go away, even if they have, not opening it, but having a conversation with who sent it to them, or having a conversation to an adult they trust in their life to say, hey, this was sent to me. I'm totally uncomfortable with this. What do I do next? And I think that's really important that we have those conversations the minute that we give them the phone. Because we always used to talk about the guy, the stranger danger stuff that we always used to teach him, the dude in the trench coat. We never knew that it was going to be the kid sitting next to us in the seat at school. The messages aren't different or change. They're just different in their delivery. Stranger danger. And what do you do when something happens that you're uncomfortable with? Who can you go to? What are those lifelines that we can give them? And that becomes equally as complicated as it was when I was a kid. Who do you trust? What person in your child's life do you think that they could go to? And do you have the type of relationship with your child that they can come to you with absolutely anything, regardless of the language that's being used? And do they have the language skills to be able to convey that information? And that's a tough one. There's a conversation I think Chris and I were having before in terms of the way that we parent is, there's so many times that we wanted to be our parent, the friends to our kids, but they need the parent side of it because they still need to have that person that's always there that unfortunately does have the authority to help in a way that they may not like, the push or shove where, okay, this hasn't worked, your conversations haven't worked, now we need to take it to the next level. Does anybody have any thoughts or feedback on what I'm saying?
Yeah, just to raise a hand or type something in the box. I've enabled chatting from anybody. So if you'd like to just unmute, you can pose your question that way too. While you're thinking about that, one occurred to me, Rachel, which was when you talk about, sticking a cell phone under a bathroom stall door, there must be some discussion of bullying that goes on. And is this part of the kind of standard school-based discussion of bullying, that there's, certainly there's physical abuse, but there's sexual abuse, and certainly unwanted photographing is sexual abuse?
We get into it, like, we'll talk a little bit about cyberbullying and whatnot, but just inappropriate images are inappropriate images. When we start talking about bullying, the concept of bullying, whether it's cyber or otherwise, it's intent, right? And not just intent, but frequency and what the intention is behind it. Sometimes they're just being ridiculous kids, and they don't think of those consequences on that. This could be something bigger than just being a moron. Because how often is kids were you sitting in the toilet where somebody next door decides they have to stick their head in there and wonder what you do? Hey, how's it going? I mean, not that I had a weird childhood or anything, but
never.
Okay, maybe I did. But or people going over top, like talking to you back and forth, right? Not thinking about the consequences. But again, now we're introducing another layer, which is the digital world, right? Yes, it's inappropriate. Yes, if you decide to, forward that, or even taking the image is such a violation of privacy. So we do get into that.
Yeah.
And again, these are conversations when I go into the school. I started this typically in grade 5, well, mostly 6 and 7s. Now I'm beginning this conversation in grade 3. And we talk about digital citizenry, or being a good citizen and leaving a digital footprint, and how do we want to, how do we want to leave our legacy online? Grade 3, right? So back to the 7-year-olds that have phone. We've already had a couple of years involved with the phone already. So the challenge here is that, the establishment. Oh, there's a question in the chat line, sir. I feel like I'm on one of those phones. And yeah, the question that Gwyneth has, and I think everybody sees, says, do you have any suggestions for communication strategies that will encourage children to speak up if they see something wrong or do something wrong that overpowers the fear of getting in trouble? We do. And I mean, these are the same strategies that we would apply when it comes to bullying conversation. So there's different methodologies that we're using in the school system, whether it's a WITS program or other. So it's, in terms of bullying, we walk away, we would talk to somebody, investigate some solutions. And if they did they work? Didn't they work? The thing that I'm really appreciative in the school right now is that we do have a lot of the roots of empathy and understanding how this not speaking up or not having the courage, and the bystander conversation is really big within the schools, and how you can actually help out others by not being the bystander. And if you don't feel strong enough to do it, talk to somebody or group of people that might be able to help you. It's just like when we were kids, if we broke something, we didn't, hiding it didn't feel too great either. And we lived with that guilt until we fessed up and we knew we were going to get into trouble. But it felt better to have fessed up finally that you broke the vase or lost something. But in this environment, it can be life altering for a very long time. Gwen, did that answer the question a bit? Sort of?
Yes, that was great. Thank you.
It's hard because sometimes when I go off on the rant, but it's so much this has to do with developing really strong relationships. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's your child. It could just be with youth around you that you've developed a relationship with in the course of, it could be your work. It could be just a kid that hangs out with your friends that may not have those supports at home or around them, but they've developed that communication and that ability with you. And it's giving those strategies and being able to help them out in that end to be able to use their voice or find a means of them finding their voice. And that's all to do with relationships. It's the thing that I one of the terms that came up a long time ago is that there's no such thing as a mall rat anymore. So those of us of an age who were maybe mall rats at one point in time, does anybody not know what I mean by mall rats? Gwyneth? Yeah. Is that a yes, you do or you don't?
She's putting her hand up.
So for those that don't know it, the mall rats were the kids that all hung out at the mall because they had nowhere else to go, because that's what you did after school.
Yeah, now it's the over 70s that are the mall rats.
That's right. Taking up the food fare. That's quite hysterical. We've come full circle. The reality, though, is that we used to communicate that way. That's how we actually got together. We learned about each other. We sorted out our issues. If we were having a hard time, we looked for advice from each other. Now it's done online. And that's scary because they sort out their differences online. They sort out the answers to life, and they look for advice. They look for understanding, and they look for friendship online. And that's where we get into the scary stuff. They seek acceptance and knowledge. So if we don't want to answer the hard questions or even the easy questions, you just go find it online and understand. Like I used to have this conversation with one of my siblings, is that you can take the phone away, you can take their laptop away, and you can remove everything that you can from the home. There is Wi-Fi absolutely everywhere, and every friend has one. So you're not going to stop the behavior if you don't have an opportunity to have that conversation. It's really important to understand, like, at one point in time, we could say, yeah, you can't watch TV. You're not allowed to watch TV. That's it. Little did we know, they went next door and they watched it anyways, right? Sir?
One of the things, and I'm just going to contribute a little bit. I didn't do a lot everything right as a parent, but one of the things I did right, I'll take some pride in, is building a trusting relationship with my kids. And the biggest thing for me in succeeding at that was dealing with my own anxiety about their questions, so that they could ask me anything and they wouldn't be worried about what my reaction was, because my first response was to listen to them and respond honestly to their question, even if I didn't like the question.
Yeah.
And over the years, and that started very, very young. And I often doubted myself. Am I being too honest with my kids? But the feedback from my kids now as adults is that no, that was something that taught them that they could always trust me to get an honest answer. They didn't always agree with my answer, but they knew I was being honest with them. And that was a key to building that relationship, where in fact they did come to me with some very hard questions. And I always felt really privileged by that.
It can be hard. I mean, and I think I established a fairly similar, and I didn't get it right all the time. And I can say that there's been times where I made some humongous mistakes, and we are all still paying for them very dearly, because it's no longer a case of being wrong. It became a mental health issue in the end. And that, if children came with guidebooks, it would be fabulous. They do not. So we can only go with what we've got. So same thing, if the questions were asked and I didn't know, or it was a super complex answer, I could say, okay, I'm going to give it to you this way. This is the black and white version. As we get older, I will give you the really complex answer. Does that work for you? Or nowadays, what I suggest to parents, if they're not sure, work with the kids online. Go with them to where they are. Have them show you what they're seeing. And within reason, of course, but be open to the asking those. And also be honest, I don't know. So let's go look it up, because they can, and they are manipulating. I mean, they were keyboarding at kindergarten when our kids were in kindergarten. I was laughing because in grade 9, I chose drama and theater instead of keyboarding. So, you know, it's really important to develop that early, and it's hard. It's really hard because there's things that we would never have thought of when we were younger, you know, but having very difficult conversations, our parents had to do it. The difference is Dr. Google wasn't there. You know, we couldn't just decide, we could go quick, get the Encyclopedia Britannica, we could look it up. You know, those things were very real. They were usually very wrong, and it was usually something nasty from the 1950s. But, you know, in the 70s, that might have been okay. But it's so different now, because now we have all the social media sites. And I mean, these are just the biggies when you're looking at it. So, you know, we talk about open communications, asking permission. Let's talk about stranger danger. So YouTube has 2 billion users. Facebook has 3 billion users. Twitter has 330 million. Instagram has 1 billion. And we have, 3 billion at Facebook. My apologies, and YouTube. You have Snapchat, which is one of the ones that's used most by the kids, is 265 million daily users. And TikTok, the biggie now, has 2 billion users. That has doubled in the last year since the pandemic. TikTok used to be a thing called Musical.ly, which was a big thing. And they're based out of Asia, or specifically in China. You know, I asked the kids, what's the big deal about all those numbers? And, you know, it's really kind of interesting what they come up with is, well, you know, there's lots of people, so many strangers. And the biggest thing that's coming up now is so many influencers. And then we get into the world of influencers. Does anybody, okay, Gwyneth, you're the right age for this. Sorry. Yes. I you know what, that you'll understand when you're older is a challenging one, but you can actually, it does work when you say it's just more complex when you get older, if that makes any sense too. But does anybody know what an influencer is? I wish I could see faces.
I know.
It's so hard.
Gwyneth does. She certainly knows what an influencer is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's important that people understand it, is that influencers are huge. So an influencer is literally a paid person that's there to market the living daylight out of you, and they make millions of dollars. Literally, an influencer is a person or a group that has the ability to influence the opinions of others. So I could make millions selling my fabulous spectacles right here, because everybody should have them. You know, but this is a multi-million-dollar industry now, where people that are super young are making a killing, and even a lot older, on everything from, hey, look at my eyelashes, and their face is in yours all the time. So I asked the kids, what's the difference between an influencer and peer pressure? And it's funny because some of the kids, no, influencers aren't, it's not peer pressure, really? So if you and your friends believe that one influencer is superior to another, and you have to go and buy their lipstick, eyebrow pencil, whatever it is you're using, and everybody else is, you know, out to lunch, what's the difference? So they have a bit of an aha moment, but as parents and as people that are walking our youth through this, we have to be able to look at that similarity of peer pressure, as we understood it, is no different than what the influencers are doing to our youth, or not even our youth, to our grandparents now, because the intergenerational usage of the internet is phenomenal. And the tragic part of it is, especially since the pandemic has become so, the internet has manifested itself in the lives of many of our older adults without having any controls over what they're using. And you're seeing the rise, and the unintended consequences of that are a mass amount of scamming and an incredible amount of people being raked out of all kinds that you would never have thought. And that has everything to do with the same thing we're trying to teach our children, is having those conversations. They're embarrassed when they get scammed, or something happens, or they build a romance with somebody and that person bilks them. This is what the kids are going through as well. This is the same thing as our older adults, right? It's about loneliness, acceptance, and just wanting that connection. So it's a challenge. It really is. You know, when we get into the social networking sites, we start to think about, well, what is it that everybody's doing on these sites? Well, they're sharing photos, right? They're politics, tattoos, tweets, interests. They follow people. So when I ask the kids, I say, I work with the RCMP and in the policing world. What do I think of following people? What is that in my world? And they'll tell you, stalking, yes. But in the world of the net, following a person is fandom. Like it was me buying Tiger Beat when I was a kid and putting all my pictures of people we won't talk about now because I'm a little embarrassed. But these are the things we did. It's just in a different way with them, and it's unfettered access. You know, the thing that we also see is that there's pro-suicide sites, there's pro-anorexia sites, there's pro-everything sites. If you want to Google it, you'll find it. And that's terrifying because there's good and bad, right? There are really good, healthy sites out there that are meant to guide, to help, and to offer some suggestions, but also to say, we don't know, here's the professionals, they do, or here, you can contact the professionals by calling this line. Many of them being youth-based, some of them being parent-based and youth-based. So there's a lot of good there. It's just, if we don't guide or point people in that direction some way, shape, or form, they're going to find the baddies real quick because they're going to be the ones that are highest on the Google readout or whatever you want to call it, the list.
Can I jump in with a question there?
Please.
Rachel, when you talk about, the internet having everything, including, anorexia and suicide websites and so on, is there a growing divergence? Like there's I think of it as an analogous to the wealth gap where the middle class is being hollowed out and there's super successful people and then there's everybody else being pushed into deeper poverty. There's a similar thing on the internet where the internet is being used in a really constructive and creative way by a small group of individuals. And a lot of people are actually being having poorer mental health outcomes and being driven to scams and having lots of negative effects. Is it polarizing society into more, or is it just the human condition in a different way?
I have nothing that can back me up into
You're gonna be rescued by Jane.
Professional.
Okay, go ahead, Jane. You have to unmute.
I was just thinking that one of the problems is the difficulty people have with thinking and their executive brain functions, because so often there's not a lot of things that say, when you have all those influencers and you have people who have, they make YouTubes on this and YouTubes on that, and everybody thinks that's true. People haven't got the skills to go, wait a minute, what is there in that says to me that's not okay? And learning those skills is very, very difficult. I see that all the time, with clients, both kids and adults. And I think that whole thing about learning how to think and to evaluate those influencer things is really crucial. And we have so much that stops that on the internet, right? You can get your answer there, so you don't have to think for yourself to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think that parents need to get kids to learn, if I do this, what do you think would happen? And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and also the algorithms that are designed to provoke an emotional reaction first, which bypasses that executive function, right?
Right. So, but if you've got a well-integrated person, that's fine. But a lot of stuff has been set up pardon me, because I have a little bit of conspiracy in here, but that there's a setup that says, we don't want people to think for themselves. We want people to do what we want so that they will buy or purchase or do or behave in this way. And I think that's a tough one.
Thanks.
So that's all I had to say. Yeah. Lane lost her.
Yeah, they lost their sound.
Yeah, Elaine, I'll type a response.
But I would ask the question, has that really changed with the digital age. I think that even before the digital age, we had to deal with some of those questions as to mass marketing and people for trying to get us to buy certain things, and all the other issues that we have with executive thinking, because we have a lot of people that are, that concept that came up now, sheeple, which I loathe the term, but even as a youngster, we started talking about those things, about people who were pressuring us to buy whatever it is, Coke or Pepsi. Remember the big Pepsi wars and Coke wars and whatnot. I think what the internet has done is just made it so much more accessible to mess with people's heads and to not allow them to think for themselves, because the instant gratification of getting an answer without having to look for any other sources. But we talk about that, the kids are looking for answers, and they're looking for guidance, they're looking for acceptance. And if we're not listening, we as the adults in their life, and they're not communicating or monitoring what's happening, someone else will, and they can. We've heard a lot of it lately in the media about sextortion, which is a term I find fascinating. But we know that the anonymity of the internet is allowing a lot of trust and intimacy to develop with people that are there solely for the purpose of finding that kid or that adult, depending, because we're dealing with youth in this concept and raising youth, but this is happening across the board with vulnerable persons in general. We know that they're sympathizing with people, and then they start to ease inhibitions. And this is something that is brutal. If anybody remembers the story of Amanda Todd, does anybody not know who Amanda Todd is or what happened with Amanda Todd?
You might want to do a little refresher just in
I was
case.
gonna say, and there are no crickets. I love cricket sounds. So Amanda Todd was 15 when she committed suicide, and she committed suicide because she felt that she had, obviously there's more going on, but the big catalyst was an individual that she had become, I will say, intimate on the internet with, had said to her, well, if you really like me, basically take a picture of your, in her case, it was if her chest or whatever it was. And, I'll know that you really do care. And we have this conversation in this relationship. And she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't do it. And then she finally did it. And then he threatened to fan out and send that to the rest of the world, and which he did in the end, to her intimate circle. And she was already being bullied and harassed. And one thing led to the other, and ultimately she committed suicide. But before she did commit suicide, she actually did a very poignant video that she uploaded to talk through what happened and what happened to her. And it was heartbreaking. And this has been back in the news because they finally found the individual, who happened to be in Holland. And I believe he was was he extradited? I can't remember. I know he got the charges and he was charged. And Amanda's mother is still working quite heavily with the police and with youth so that it doesn't happen to another child. If we don't listen to our children, if we don't listen, and if we don't know the answers, I would suggest just look for them together and let them ask those hard questions and find ways that you can actually have difficult conversations that you are incredibly uncomfortable with, because we don't know the internet like they do. We are pedestrians. They're the lifelong travelers. They've been here from the very beginning. They've never not known technology. Like I said, back to my microwave, never had one. It was weird. But if you can establish the communicative relationship really early, it becomes really normal. And then you actually also gather up those digital citizens within your world, getting along to the kids and talking to them where, they decide one day they go to the big party. This is grade 6 and grade 7, because the parties are going to happen then, and they're going to start whipping out the phone, and they're going to start taking pictures of people being foolish. Sadly, I'm also talking to them about drug use at this stage in their life, about, given the world that we're moving in now, the first time you try something may be the last time you try anything. And again, back to the grades 5, 6, and 7s in this realm, but they're taking pictures of their exploits. And again, this isn't something that we all didn't do. It's just that you didn't want somebody at the pharmacy where you're getting your pictures printed to see what you were up to, because they might tell your parents, depending on what town you came from. It was more complicated. And then with bullying, taking those pictures and going to school with the steno and running them off and sticking them on lockers just seems way too much to do. So here now, they can do all these things and send all of this out. But what they don't realize is that the internet is forever. So we have a case of an individual, this was back in the mid 2000s, that they had, we talked about it earlier, a relationship where they were 15 and 16 years old at the time. The woman involved was 15. Her boyfriend and her took a bunch of fairly explicit shots of each other because they loved each other and they were never going to break up ever, ever, ever. And of course, as life goes on in those ages, they broke up. And he was right bent out of shape about the whole thing. And so what he did is he created a fake profile and a website, posted all the pictures under a different, under her name, offering her services for a certain amount of money. And it was horrendous. He, obviously the RCMP found out fairly quickly, took the site down fairly quickly. This young lad was 16 years old. When it went to court, he was charged with the distribution of child pornography. He was raised to adult court. So they didn't keep him in the Youth Criminal Justice Act system. At that time, wouldn't have been Youth Criminal Justice Act, but he was raised and he went to a federal prison. He is now on the sex offender registry for the rest of his life. And if he gets out, that young lad has no chance of being normal in the way that we would hope he would have grown up in the environment that he would have been honed in. But he is now in a federal prison with federal nasty guys, and he's not coming out of this the way he went in. Revenge posts are horrendous. It happens all the time. The young woman in this, so typically in a world of social work, if they have a child or a youth that's gone sideways, it wasn't uncommon for you to be able to say, okay, look, let's send you to grandma's, let's send you to aunties or whomever, and you can start fresh. Just go with it, get on with life without having to deal with all the baggage you have back in the hometown. You don't have that privilege anymore. So this young lady left her community because they shamed her and said she should never have taken the pictures in the first place. Thus, it was her fault. And that at that time, she went to another community. In a matter of weeks, everything surfaced because, like with people who thought that was Snapchat, if those pictures dissolved in 10 seconds, you'd never see them again. Somebody took a screenshot. And so she was, again, harangued and harassed. These are the things that our youth are dealing with. How do you have those conversations? How do you have the opportunity to say to them, look, you may be feeling these great feelings, these huge feelings, but let's have a discussion. This could be forever. So think about this, that when you're 30 and 40 years old and you decide to Google your name, what do you want to come up? And those are the conversations we are starting in grades 2 and 3 now as a good digital citizen. And how do you be respectful online and all those things that we used to call it internet safety. It's safety. It's safety in the whole of the world, but how do you make yourself and you give those skill sets to such a young age? And it's starting early and earlier. We're dealing with revenge posts are like fraudulent profiles and emails and text. They send a lot of real drama online, and the kids like to use the word drama because for us, that's things like, gossip, secrets, rumors, friendships, rating people. I don't know if any of you have heard of the rating sites where they're not just rating their doctors, because we all go look at those, or anything else, but they're rating each other. They're dealing with sending information to people to ruin or damage friendships and reputations. And that's where you're getting into the cyberbullying world and bullying in general, because that's where it gets really horrendous. And the other thing too is that they're taking pictures because they can, and they're digitally altering them. Right. So all of us have seen the manipulation. Most of us have played with photo manipulation online if you hang out on a computer any long time. But these are the things that are happening constantly. When we have established the guidelines with our kids of talking about asking permission to go somewhere, when we've said to them, discuss this with me before you go there, looking both ways, and something that Gwen had mentioned earlier, the internet highway is called the internet highway for a reason. If you go into a chat room, all kinds of things could be going on. If somebody wants to take you to private chat to have some inappropriate conversations while you're playing World of Warfare or World of Lord, I'm not a gamer. The husband's a gamer. All of these things are happening to our younger and younger children. We need to be able to instill the skill set to say to them, say, look, if something creepy is going on, talk to me. Because all the sites will have a mechanism to report it to whoever's hosting the site. And there's means and ways of blocking people. And or if it's gotten to that point where we've crossed a line into the world of being illegal, screenshot it and start talking to the police, because there's entire units around the world that are dealing strictly with cyber safety, cyberbullying, and exploitation. And it's brutal. Questions, thoughts?
Yeah, we're getting to the time when we do need to get to some questions. So over to you folks, the participants here. I've allowed everybody to participate. So unmute, ask a question, type something in the chat, whatever you want. Go ahead, Gwyneth.
I'm just wondering, and I don't know if this is a bit off topic or not, but do you have any information about data mining and how that affects children as well as adults?
That's huge. It does and it doesn't, because if you talk about, you know, influencers and whatnot, what they're doing when you're going onto those sites and being able to get information, that goes into that whole concept of being able to protect the information that you're putting online and how you protect it. Internet safety is a huge thing, and the amount, actually, it's really interesting. I just recently got a document that talks about how easily people are hacked depending on how complicated their password is. And it's really quite astounding and terrifying, because the less complicated you make it, it's seconds. The more complicated, even if it's just a mix of letters and characters and whatnot, the more that you change that variation, the harder it is for the hackers to break that code. But data mining is really something phenomenal. Does everybody know what data mining is? I should ask that question.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Gwen, do you want to explain data mining?
I mean, I don't know if I have a proper technical definition, but it's a set of techniques used to get personal information out of internet users in ways that's not always obvious.
Awesome.
I think of like those posts on Facebook that you often see that say kind of like post the name of your first pet or share the name of your first pet. And
Perfect.
the reason, well, not always, but sometimes those kind of posts are shared because people often use the name of their pets as kind of in passwords and as security questions. You know, when you have like a website and you have to set up a set of questions, what was the name of your first pet is a fairly common one. But I don't know if that definition could be expanded, I'm sure.
That's perfect. No, I think you've got a good example, because it's exactly what you say there. So when you get those quizzes or you get those things, what's your mother's maiden name? You know, what's the first thing we all did when we had to open our bank accounts? What's your mother's maiden name? Data mining is people with phishing techniques. And when I say phishing, it's PHI. Other ways of getting information from you, where you click on links that are bogus, that send you to another site, which at times can send everything from a worm into your computer, not just a virus, but a worm actually goes through your entire computer. Or now we're dealing with ransomware, and the amount of ransomware hits is absolutely astronomical. So these, I mean, if you want to tie it into talking about, you know, raising youth and children in a digital age, is setting up those security sites, right? Setting up all your safety nets. So when they ask for those questions, you know, make them complicated, make sure your passwords are changed, make those passwords complicated. Don't give your age, right? There's all kinds of we can do, but it's really important that you set up those safety features to protect you and your friends from being hacked. And one of the things that we talked about, and I've gone fuzzy, is if you don't have your security settings set in a way that protects your friends, you could be endangering somebody on your own page. That is, you know, an example could be one of your friends is in protective care because of something that's happened in the family. The family's broken down, there's no contact orders, and they're looking for them. Yes, ma'am.
Jane?
And I'm going to unfuzzy myself.
Sorry, I was going to agree with that, that I have seen that. And I've seen people do that on TikTok. as well. And I spent about 6 months trying to convince somebody about the dangers of what they were doing. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that a lot of games do allow others to access who are not safe.
Yeah.
And I saw that with my, I guess he was 8 at the time, 8-year-old. Fortunately, his mother monitors everything very carefully. But I think that people need to know that a lot of games that young kids get into can access other people. So you can have a whole network of people, some of whom are not kids. And then other things start to happen.
This is where you're playing things like Roblox, I think is one of them is called. There used to be all kinds, even Minecraft, which is a phenomenal game,
Yeah.
but you have to put those parameters on there. You can put filters on it so that they cannot go outside a certain group. So
Right.
there is possibilities there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. LAN parties were a big thing and still are, as far as I know, where everybody gets together, bring their own computer and game it up with each other. And it's just different types of games with the same thing. Internet has allowed us to play together. But, it's really important. And this has been a challenge for the social work field and the policing world as well. When you have to get it across that you can possibly have no internet presence at all, because it puts you at such a risk of having something untoward happen. And it's been a very complex issue to deal with within the social work world. So there's something I mean in terms of questions and whatnot. I do have some links and information that can be helpful that I can bring up that are talking about respect and safe education when it comes to youth online. Another one is a parent resource for kids with technology and cyberbullying, NetSmarts, and I do have this. I'll bring that slide up if I remember how to share again properly. And also CyberTip, and CyberTip is actually probably one of my favorite sites, and that one does talk about exploitation and concerns with youth behaving in a way, and actually parental abductions and whatnot. But for me, it's been very consistent over the last 20 years that I've been working in this world, talking about protecting what you're doing. So I had a great post that had this granny staring at you with that look that only a granny could do, saying, "I saw what you posted last night on the internet," and give you that look of horror. So one of the key things that I always talk to the kids about when they're posting or they're talking about things is to say, give it the grandma test. If you wouldn't show your grandmother, or if you'd be mortified if they found out, even more so, don't do it. And also, I use the example of the 17-year-old kid that when he was angry and he posted that link in that website, do you think he thought about the consequences? So, Jane, we talk about what you're talking about, the consequences of everything. This is, if you do this, what could happen? That's the big picture now, because it's a forever thing. It's not just you need to go to Mrs. Jones's house and apologize for breaking the window because you threw the rock without thinking or you did something foolish. This is big picture of the rest of your life could be on the line here because you've made an unfortunate decision. And I do have to say the schools are being really good for the most part. I mean, a lot of it has to do with resourcing and ability and time, given what's thrown at the teachers, is teaching people to understand the consequences for their actions. There's a lot of different strategies that they're using, and some of the have-not schools, I've seen some huge changes in the kids when we've been allowed to go there. I've been banned. Well, the schools have had a hard time having me in there over the last 2 years, so it's been a big change. But yeah, it's been very interesting. The other thing I wanted to talk about, though, is as well as we're talking about this, is things that we have to really identify when we start seeing youth that are being exploited online, being bullied online, or just being bullied, period, is that it does lead to other issues such as anxiety disorders and general PTSD, OCD, RCD, depression, substance misuse, antisocial personality disorders. I've seen this within my own family. And the direct results of it is living in an environment where they were being hammered constantly and had no control over what was happening to them at school. In my world, it didn't happen online. Had it been online, I can't even imagine at this time, because 2 years later, it did happen to move on to the internet world. But I think it's one of those things that youth are faced constantly with the changing world that's moving those things that we've learned and we've, been through in a very different fashion. How we apply technique and how we have applied those things that we've learned, we can pass down to our kids. We just have to expand the scope of what that looks like. And it sounds kind of insane, but really nothing has changed when it comes to safety messaging. It's just how we apply it really does change. Questions? Oh, I'm gonna find that slide. For a person that's not really good with like not having faces, this is very good for me. It's very interesting.
You're doing great. This is fabulous stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring up, if everybody's interested in it, they're actually cyberbullying in the law, and actually exploitation and actual privacy in the law. I scare the children every now and then because I put up the full legal content of what the privacy laws are in very small print and tell them this is the problem. So, you could be dealing with things under the Human Rights Act if what you're saying and you're posting goes against the Human Rights Act, as well as the hate laws and whatnot. It's just quite fabulous with them. And they get it and they look horrified. Okay, let me throw up the links.
Yep, go for it.
Can Rachel do it? I have to ask the question. Look at that. There they are. Handy links.
Beautiful.
These are only a few. I have many, but these are some that I think are really good resources if you're interested in looking. NetSmarts is fabulous because it also has a lot of games that are age appropriate and they go young as well as to the older group. And then you can move into the tweens and teens. But there is incredible information and resources. Google Safety actually has some really good sites as well. I try to keep within the Canadian world as well. That's a good question, Gwyneth. So do I think that the situation is getting better with the increased amount of education and resources? I think we're trying to keep up with the tsunami. The problem we have is that everything is changing and moving so rapidly that we as the adults in this world have to try to keep up with changing technology and those things that our youth and our children are facing. As long as we try to stay on top of it to the best of our ability and be honest when we're not, I think we have a chance. But it's hard. Education's huge, resources are huge, but one of the kids asked me this recently in the school was what I said to them, I used to talk about this. She said, do I go into the high school? And I don't anymore. And part of the reason is at that point in time, the police are involved. Oftentimes, it's no longer me trying to be proactive and give tools. It's whether those youths that I have hopefully had some effect on are using them as they get older. And I've had some great conversations with older youth and now adults who are having kids of their own, which is terrifying, that they've remembered some of the stories and they've remembered things and being able to use them or to pass them on. So hopefully I've been doing something correctly for a little while. But hard way to answer, Glenn. Sure.
Yeah, Grace, go ahead.
Yes, I'm wondering if you don't go to the high school, who does?
RCMP.
Just the RCMP, and do they have adequate service?
So within Vernon, we have.
Oh, sorry, Grace, you'll have to mute.
Oh, sorry.
Your echo. Sorry. With the RCMP, they do have a school liaison officer. They always have, and we've tag team quite frequently where we've gone in together at the younger ages. They have different ways of delivering the message, and there's never enough resources. I don't care if you're a teacher, a counselor, or you're a person that's in the policing world, there's never enough resources to be able to affect as much as we would like to and touch on all those things that we see. I also work within the restorative justice world, and it's the same thing, right? It's quite challenging, but they're really good at what they do. And the difference is that they try to bring in, they don't want to go to that scared straight model that we talked about before, but rather an educational model. And they do well. Again, not every police officer is an educator. And unfortunately, not every educator is a good teacher. So it's a challenge no matter what resources you've got, but Vernon could certainly use more. But I think any community you go to would say the same thing.
Well, the real concern is in youth, and we look at, we're talking about executive function, and we have so many children that have attention deficit and so on, and they can be misled so easy. So, this is, I'm just wondering, I'm really glad you're going to the elementary school, because it's starting so young, and that's a real good place. But I tell you, after listening to you today, and then all these things, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm glad I don't have to be working with teenagers now. There's so much to deal with, because the exposure in our day, it was easier. You're easier to work with them because they weren't exposed to so much. So this is really troubling, and parents will really need help. That's all I can say.
I work in a world of crime prevention through social development, and crime prevention through social development looks at the real root causes of crime. And this is not new information. When we start to see families that are struggling, when we start to see families that have multiple things happening to them, or we start to see a breakdown, or we see a family that's been living in poverty, we need to wrap around services in order to reduce the possibility of that family completely losing the ability to function. And that's where we see children start to move into criminal behavior, because that's the world that they need to move in order to survive for one way or the other. This is not new, and this is not based on the internet. I think the internet has just complicated things in a way that it's bigger, but we still have the family, whether it's, as I said before, I've been a single parent, I've been a step parent, the whole 9 yards. And when we configure our family unit, it's still, those principles still apply, of communication and of those basic things we always learned when we were younger, and what was instilled in us in terms of safety. It's frightening, but sometimes crossing the street in Vernon can be quite frightening. And, we just have to look out for what we're doing, and hope that, when we do make a mistake, that we don't get hit by a car. But certainly with our youth and our children, and the internet is being there at their side at the times that they need us the most, because we're not taking it away. It's not going to go anywhere.
I actually am perversely comforted by this material, as concerning as all of it is, because it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm not hearing this right, but it seems to me that all the old-fashioned things about good parenting and good families are the best solutions that we have. Good communication lines, trust between kids and parents. It's, in the same way that you can have lifelong consequences when you get behind the wheel of a car, you can have lifelong consequences of putting something on the internet. And
Yes.
and it's the same conversation that you have with your kids. The real challenge is that the kids are younger, if they get a cell phone at that age, or if their friends do. And that seems to be the complicating factor here, is the age. But the solutions are the basics, in the best way.
And the reality is families have always been struggling. This is not new. The dynamic of a family and what people consider families has changed somewhat. But in the whole point of communication hasn't. If you had a precocious child that asked you or that gave you hell at 3 years old when you said that Jack Frost had painted the windows, they were shindig rainbows, and they decided to tell you that was refraction at 3 years old, everybody's different, but communication is still critical, and to understanding, especially when you don't know what the heck they're talking about at times. Everybody's different in every family, and families are such a complicated word these days, which sounds like a ridiculous thing to say. But the reality is that the relationships that are the foremost in our lives, that make those people, whether it's biological or those ones we choose to be in those circles, is to still weave that tapestry tight enough that the holes don't come through because we haven't been able to link the threads together, whether that's in communication or discussion or trying to find solutions to complications that you don't understand either and working through them. And that's, I don't think that's any different than it has been even prior to the internet coming into being. It's just the internet just makes it so much more, because if you don't answer it, people will find out, for better, for worse.
So we're coming up on the end of our time. Any last thoughts or questions? Please go ahead.
Everybody's mortified and wants never touch the internet again. It's a good place. There's good things. You can see things in real time that we could never even witness, like exploding volcanoes. Right?
Okay, go ahead, Grace.
I was just thinking, one of the things what I'm seeing through all this is the counselors really have to understand the internet to know, in order to help these young people, because this is really, I worked a lot with youth in my day, and I thought we had it covered, but had we had the internet, I would have been really struggling to try to learn that system, especially when we get older. I'm really glad that the counselors are younger and maybe grew up with technology, because we sure need technology if we're going to help our children. That's what I'm really learning today. Thank you very much. This has really been something. What a learning experience. I had no idea.
Thanks, Grace. Anyone else? Oh, thanks, Gwyneth. Hopefully we'll get a few more people jumping in on the YouTube record of this. It's really important stuff. I'm so grateful
I
to
just
Rachel.
think it was really well done. I really appreciated it. And I think that the emphasis on the family connections is really important, because we have so many kids who have these adverse child experiences, which create problems later, and probably problems in using the internet. So I just want to thank you. I think that was really good, Rachel.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And you know, it's funny. It's again, with family connections, it's defining what they consider to be a family, because it's not what, you know, the two parents, the dog, and the 2.5 kids. So I've never understood the 2.5 kids thing. But the reality is family can be chosen family and not look like everything else, as long as you've got that relationship and that line of communication. Well,
Okay. Well, thank you again to everybody for being here, for Rachel, for your fabulous presentation. I was not surprised, and I was not disappointed. Sorry, Grace, you've unmuted. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say thank you. Yeah.
Okay. We're doing one more in this series. Our next one is in a month's time, and it is Anna Warwick Sears, who is the executive director. Thank you. She will be talking about water and climate change in the Okanagan. She's the executive director of the Okanagan Water Basin, the Okanagan Basin Water Board. So she's on the front lines of this stuff, and the Don't Move a Muscle campaign is connected with her work and so forth. So it's again going to be a really great presenter and really important information. So so thank you. We will be done for tonight. Thanks again, Rachel, and thanks for coming. And God bless everybody.
Thank you.
And good night.